How you think is the most important thing about you.
Hey, welcome to session 5 of F1. This is a wonderful session. I really enjoy this one because it's starting to lay the more of a framework or more of a foundation for the importance of a mentor in your life. Again, it's so vital that we have mentors in our life that are helping us learn how to think, because you and me all by ourselves can only think what we think. You might have been in a situation before where you've got some problem that you're trying to solve, and you might be laying there in bed at night and you're just looking at the ceiling and you're kind of thinking and you're trying to solve it, and you keep going round and round in circles and never really able to solve the problem. That's because you can only think what you think, and you're going to continue to come up with the same situation over and over and over. The only way for us to grow in the way that we think, or to bust out of that box, is to begin to allow new thoughts to come in from the outside. New thoughts that hopefully will be thoughts that will help us move forward. So session 5 is all about learning what we don't know, which is very interesting. It's almost like you could say it's how to unlearn a lot of the junk that we've picked up. Now, when I say junk, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was all stupid to begin with. It's very possible that as you grew up, as you went through certain seasons in your life, there was information that you learned and things that you determined, conclusions that you came to in life that allowed you to survive or allowed you to get through that circumstance. But it's not necessarily a way to think or a way to react for the rest of your life. It was just something that worked well then. For instance, when you're going through junior high, there are certain things that you have to adopt into your life to survive junior high. But once you move on up into high school and into college and into life, you want to let go of some of those ideas. Okay? So, session 5 is all about learning what we don't know, which unfortunately can be a shock to some of us, and it can make us feel a little uncomfortable. Now, as we've talked about in classes before, this journey of discipleship all begins and has a foundation of discipline and character. Before we can become true servant leaders in our culture, we must spend time being submitted and spend time underneath the teaching of somebody else, allowing someone to train us and teach us. Now, naturally, that's supposed to happen in our home. It's supposed to be mom and dad. However, it doesn't always happen that way. Even if we had great mom and dads, it doesn't always happen that way. I had a great mom and dad. However, I just wanted to do what I wanted to do, remember? So I didn't tend to listen to them a whole lot. But it's very important for us at some point in our life to begin to increase our willingness to allow someone to speak into us. Now, chances are pretty good that you've probably had a teacher somewhere along the road that you really, really liked. And you learned a lot about the subject that they taught. This would be kind of the idea that I'm talking about. I had some teachers that I wasn't going to let them anywhere near me. But there were a few teachers that I really enjoyed, and I learned a ton in their class. So this is that idea. But when it comes to personal development, really opening up and allowing someone to see inside of how I'm thinking, to allow somebody inside my mind, inside my heart, to actually evaluate my thoughts and my emotions can be something that's very different. And it's important that we have, at different seasons in our life, somebody to walk through that with us. Jesus, again, was a great model of how he did this with the disciples. So when we are being mentored or when we are being discipled, what we are doing is not just hearing some teachings, but what we're doing is actually taking on somebody else's thinking, somebody else's message, somebody else's yoke onto our life. I'm not going to think the way I think. I'm going to begin to think the way they think. And I'm going to do that replacement. That's what discipleship is all about. Discipleship isn't just going to meetings and learning some information. It's got to be replacement thinking. It's got to be, here's where I am now, I'm going to take this out and I'm going to replace it with something new. Remember Jesus when he was talking with the disciples, one of the things on the Sermon on the Mount, he said, you have always learned this, but I say this. You have heard this, but I say this. He was bringing replacement thinking, not just add-on stuff. So it's important for us to have that. Although going to church is tremendous, going to youth group is great, going to a weekly life group or something like that is wonderful. Those don't take the place of being mentored by somebody that you are actually adopting their thinking, their message, and their yoke. You remember Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, chances may be pretty good if you're like me. Chances may be pretty good that, man, this thing called following Jesus and obeying the Lord, man, that's hard. That's difficult. Ugh, it's hard to do. Well, it's only difficult because I am not taking on His yoke. I have not adopted His thinking yet. Does that make sense? Take a moment. Let that sink in. The only reason why I struggle with it is because I have not adopted His thinking. I have not taken on His yoke. I'm still wanting to do what I want to do, and then I hear Him say, you should do this, or I read in the Bible that I'm supposed to do that, and there's conflict. That's where it's difficult. But if I will adopt His yoke, then He gives me a promise that His yoke is easy and His burden is light. There's a great little conflict, little character conflict that could set up there. Maybe good for a discussion in your group. So mentoring and discipleship is vital in our personal growth and in our spiritual growth with the Lord. Unfortunately, though, we have placed so much emphasis over the years, we have placed so much emphasis on just getting saved that we've forgotten about this whole idea of being discipled and learning how to walk it out. Now, it doesn't mean by any means that being saved is less. Okay? It's very important. Obviously, it's very important. The only way to the Father is through Jesus. But if we're not careful, we can stop there and say, well, we've asked Jesus into our heart, and just stay there and not move forward. And then wonder, how come it's hard for me to obey God? How come I'm not growing? How come I don't feel like I'm expanding and becoming more confident in the Lord? It's because I'm not getting converted. You guys, there's a big difference between being saved and being converted. Asking Jesus into my heart is very important, but just because I have done that does not mean that all of a sudden I will begin thinking like Him and I will begin acting like Him. You may have had some of this conflict in your life. Wait a minute, I'm a Christian. How come I don't want to act like a Christian? Or how come all of a sudden it's hard for me to act like a Christian? It's because we've been saved, but we have not yet been converted. And here's the key thing that I want you to catch, all right? You might even want to write this down or note it in the notes here, is that if we aren't converted, then what happens is Christianity will be enough to make us feel guilty, but it will never be enough to bring change in our life. And how many of you guys have experienced that before? Go ahead and raise your hand. Have you experienced that where there's a feeling of guilt, but for one reason or another, you don't feel like there's enough to really change you? That's because of a conversion issue. So Lord, help us be converted into a new way of thinking. So this is what this session's all about. How do we get converted? Not just saved, but how do we learn what we don't know and begin to learn the ways of the Lord so we can walk in His paths? So it all starts out, as we've already introduced in some of our earlier session, starts out with the 3 E's. Remember that? The education, experience, and evaluation piece. So with learning what we don't know, we start with simply the 3 E's. We've talked a little bit about this already. With the 3 E's, the first one being the experience. There are several different programs, leadership programs, discipleship training programs that promise a certain type of experience. I'm going to be an intern over here, or I'm going to go to the mountains, or I'm going to go halfway around the world and I'm going to work with the pygmies, or I'm going to work with children in an orphanage, or I'm going to be on the beach, or I'm going to be in the snow, or something like that, where they talk about a life-changing experience, which I think is tremendous. I think it's very important for us to have these experiences. And we use this a lot in our marketing for those types of programs. Is you're going to get to go here. Here's a brochure with a lot of pictures of where you're going to be. However, what we're doing when we're appealing to those experiences is we're appealing to the emotions. We're appealing to those people that want the around the globe experience, or the experience that is going to be different than their everyday life that goes on. And again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but experience all by itself isn't enough to change you. I mean, you've been there before. You've gone to the conference. You've gone to the summer camp. You've gone on the missions trip, and it was like incredible. It really rocked your world. And you're going, man, I'm never going to be the same. But you come back home, and over time it kind of slips through your fingers. And before long, you find that you're right back in those places where you were before you left. Still dealing with some of the same struggles, having some of the same doubts, and feeling some of the same lack of confidence in front of the Lord. Experience all by itself is not going to be enough to change us. So we add the second piece, which is education. Oh, and I love this piece. I'm a natural teacher, so I love education. I love helping people with the right information, gain the right information. But again, education all by itself is not going to be enough to change me. Most of our leadership training and discipleship training programs out there right now have a heavy emphasis on experience and education. We're going to teach you these things, and we're going to give you these specific experiences, which again are all wonderful. It's a great thing. But these two pieces alone lack the power to change a life. Even the disciples, when they followed Jesus, Jesus didn't just stay with these two. He added the third, which is so vital to every discipleship training program, the evaluation piece. The evaluation piece is kind of the purple cow, as Seth Godin would say. It is the unique piece of what the furnace is all about. It's providing mentors and teachers and spiritual parents in your life to help you evaluate how you think. To get into the way that you're thinking, and to find out what is inappropriate for this situation, and coming up with new interpretations, new perspectives, new contexts to understand this information. It's only through evaluation that we are able to take the education and experience and graft it into our daily life. You've heard me say this before, but this is a transaction with the Lord. It's replacement thinking, not just add-on thinking. It's not just let me read a book and it'll be really neat and it'll change my life. It has to be identifying what needs to come out, taking it out, replacing it with what needs to go in, and then moving and replacing it with what needs to go in. Guys, discipleship training is so much more than just a class, so it needs a whole lot more than just a teacher. Discipleship training is so much more than just a program, so it needs more than just an energetic leader with some good activities to be a part of it. You guys, discipleship training is about mentoring. It's about spiritual parents. It's about learning new ways to think. And so it takes a spiritual parent. It takes someone with the heart and the desire and the time and the focus to get into your life and spend time with you learning how to think correctly. It's the evaluation piece that allows me to take the information and the experience and be able to graft it into my life. Let me explain it this way. A little bit of math, okay? Don't know if they told you there was going to be math as a part of this, but here we go. A little bit of algebra, okay? Here we go. We've got A plus B equals C. Looks kind of familiar to us. A plus B equals C. And let's say that A is my situation and B is my interpretation, okay? And then C is going to be my response or my reaction. So the situation plus my interpretation equals my response. Now here's the key thing. I want to make C, my response, always a function of A. I always, even in my prayers, Lord, I don't want this result in my life. Please change the situation. Lord, make my parents change. Make my boss change. Make my life change. Make my kids change. Lord, change the situation. Because, Lord, if you change the situation, then I'll be able to change my response. It even gets into our prayers, and we can begin to blame. If these people would just do that, then I would be able to do this a whole lot easier. Guys, I spent so much time as I grew up thinking that way, that C was always related to A. But in reality, the truth of the matter is, C is always related to B. If I want C to change, I've got to learn to change my B. You got to change the B. And that can be really hard because, again, I can only think what I think. So how do I change my B? This, again, is where the mentor comes in. This is where your spiritual parents come in. When I spend so much time trying to get the situation to change, I mean, I can wear myself out trying to get the situation to change and trying to get people to do different things than what they normally do. But it's because of this that a lot of us may grow up and say, oh, I'm never going to be like my parents, or oh, I'm never going to do that when I get older, or something like that. But if you don't learn a new way to interpret life, then I guarantee you will find yourself growing up to be exactly like what has been modeled to you. Because that has been that is what you have grown up learning, and that is what you have grown up knowing. The only way to change those results is to change the way you think. So we have to have a new context, and that's what our interpretation is. We have to have a new context to understand the situation. If somebody says something bad about us, or someone that is mean to us or something like that, the only way for us to have a new response to them, a response out of love, is to see it in a different context than where we've been in the past. If we still see it in the same context, we'll be mad. We just won't tell anybody. Okay, I'm trying not to be mad. I'm trying not to be mad. And, you know, although it's nice trying not to be mad, it's still there. You still have to deal with it. So we learn a new yoke. We learn a new way of thinking. This is what makes having a mentor in your life invaluable. They are the ones that help you interpret situations differently so you can better know how to respond appropriately. Without that new perspective in your life, you're doomed to continue to respond the same way that you have when you were 12, the same way you did when you were 18, the same way you did when you were 25, the same way you did when you were 30. And all of a sudden, here you are at 45, 50, 60 years old, still struggling with some of the same things. It can be really tough. Most people are unsuccessful with a mentor simply because of the pressure involved to adopt their thinking. Again, I want to think what I think. I want to push the boundaries back so I can do what I want to do. The mentor is the one there saying, nope, can't push the boundaries. Can't push the boundaries. And so for a lot of people who want that control, they don't want to give up that control to a mentor, they just never go there. Just never spend the time with the mentor. Humility, trust, and submission, or character, is what we have to embrace to be prepared to enter into mentorship. Remember we talked about that development of a leader, the personal development that was heavy on character development, learning how to walk in discipline? Having that foundation is what prepares us to be able to enter into a mentorship relationship where we are willing to submit and have humility in our life. But our culture doesn't know this very well, doesn't embrace this idea. It's very counterculture to have this, unless it has to do with sports. We have a lot of people that spend a whole lot of money to go to a sports mentor or a sports coach to learn a certain sport. But to develop character and integrity, we don't value that as much. I mean, just look at our culture. Just watch TV. You can see all the things right now with the wars and the crime and murder and lies and backstabbing. I mean, it's just some crazy stuff going on. We don't do really well with boundaries. We don't do really well with thinking differently. And all of these responses are simply attached to our interpretations. How we see life is how we will respond to life. What do you think about that? Does that make sense to you? How we see life is how we will respond to life. If we want to respond differently, without so much emotion, without so much drama, then we have to learn how to interpret life differently. We have to take on a new yoke. We have to take on a new way of thinking. The way you think will always determine the way you act. So what does it look like to walk in this thing called evaluation? What does evaluation look like on a day-to-day basis? Well, number one, it's slow. It's not real quick. You know, evaluation isn't just, I'm just going to read a book, I'm just going to go to a class. Evaluation has to take time, has to simmer. Also, it's intentional. It's responding to questions as they come up. It's having questions. From a student who is being mentored, one of the primary things that mentoring looks like is you're asking questions. You know, we talked a lot about that in the first couple sessions of F1 here. How's that going? Are you asking questions? Are you writing questions in your journal? Are you asking questions to the facilitator? Are you processing this new information? Are you processing the experience that are you processing the experiences that you're having? Are you processing the struggles that you're going through? If there are no questions, then there's no need to give any answers. That's a biblical principle. Ask and you shall receive. That simply means that if you want to receive, you got to ask. You got to start asking some questions. But if we never ask questions, again, for me personally, I never asked a question because I thought asking a question would reveal weakness. And as you know, I didn't like weakness, so I'm never going to ask a question. Then everybody will think that I'm strong. Exactly what I wanted. But at the same time, right behind that strong veneer, right behind that strong mask, was a lot of fear and intimidation. So that's where it begins. That's what it will begin looking like, is beginning to ask questions. You know, I do that a lot with the people that I mentor and the people that I life coach. A lot of the meetings are, what do you have questions on? What type of things are you struggling? Because I would much rather give you answers to questions that you have than to give you a whole bunch of answers to questions that you don't have. Even though they may be awesome answers. And I'm sure you've been there before. You know, you've been in church or you've been in a service or something like that, or you've talked to somebody and they've given you some good information. Oh, this is great stuff. And you wrote it down and all that kind of stuff. But you don't have that question right now. So you write it down thinking that maybe in the future you'll remember the answer to the question. But unfortunately, we get into the future and we have a question and we forget that answer that we had a long time ago. So it's really important in this mentoring relationship that it begins with asking questions. And I think that is a big place where it requires from us, as we come to our mentor, it requires a sense of humility and trust that I can ask you questions without you thinking badly about me, or I can ask you questions and I can trust the answers that you give me. So the key thing but the key thing here in the evaluation piece is simply that we have to identify the wrong, the inappropriate thinking, the thinking that's keeping us from growing, the thinking that's keeping us from interpreting our situation correctly. And so we continue to get mad, we continue to get hurt, we continue to play the victim, we continue to blame, we continue to feel like, oh, I can never go there because the situation isn't changing. I won't be able to do this until the situation changes. That's just an inappropriate way of thinking, although a lot of us do it. So to learn how to think new, remember, just like the tennis ball activity, we might have to put down some tennis balls. Just like the balloon activity, we might have to let some of the balloons go away so we can focus and submit to the one. So this is why it's impossible to mentor yourself, because you'll continue to come up with your own conclusions each time. So you just can't mentor yourself. It's got to come from outside. There's got to be somebody else that's helping us replace. The best you'll be able to do on your own is just do add-on thinking. That's a fact. That's how it works. It takes a mentor to help you do replacement thinking. So here's a classic case. I wrote a little bit of this here. A person has an experience, or have you ever been in that place before where you've had this great experience? You're going, oh, this is awesome. It might even be in one of your furnace classes that you've had so far, and you're going, man, this is incredible. This is really going to change everything. Only to find a little bit later on down, a few months later, it kind of slips away and you kind of forget it, and it all seems like a dream. That is an indication that that new information was add-on thinking, as opposed to replacement. So again, one thing we need to do with a mentor is help us find what thoughts need to be addressed and what interpretations in life need to be addressed. This is what it means in Proverbs when it says, train up a child in the way they should go. And when they're older, they won't depart from it. It's teaching them how to think rightly. It's not just training them how to be an adult, it's training them how to think rightly. And when they get older, they won't depart from it. Also, we have verses in Romans, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's a renewing of the mind, not just learning more information. You guys, you can't train yourself. You can't transform yourself. You need a trusted mentor. Yes, we need Jesus. This is where this ultimately goes. If I don't have a mentor in my life that I'm submitting to here on earth, then it will be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for me to submit to a God in heaven that I can't see. So this idea of mentorship in our life is vital in personal growth and in discipleship training. You know, I love movies that involve a great journey or great movement and stuff like that. So, you know, like Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, he had Yoda. And Frodo, I love that movie. Frodo had Gandalf. Neo had Morpheus. Even the Karate Kid, you know, he had Mr. Miyagi. And even the Kung Fu Panda, which was a great movie. Kung Fu Panda had that little furry white thing, and I don't know what that thing is, but he had that guy. Each of these movies, we love watching them. But the question is, who do you have? Who's your Yoda? Who's your Gandalf? Who is helping you move forward? Have you been willing yet to open up your life, to open up your thoughts, to open up your heart, to allow somebody to come into your life to help you interpret life in new ways? To help you gain a new context, to help you gain a new perspective on things that are going on in your life. Would you be willing to do that? Would you be willing to be mentored? It's important. Raise your hand if you would be willing to be mentored, willing to allow somebody to come into your life. Again, it's important that you do some physical action on this and not just say yes in your head. If you're interested, if you would be willing to do that, then I've continued with some notes here on how to find a mentor. So I'm not going to go over it here in the DVD, but I'd love for you to take some time and just walk through finding fruit in somebody else's life. That's how you find a mentor, is you look for fruit in their life. And one final thing before we go is a mentor in my life is going to challenge me because of the disciplining character. It's a big difference between a mentor and a cheerleader. A cheerleader is just going, hey, you're doing great, keep it going. That's nice. It's really nice. It's encouraging. But a mentor is the one that's always, remember, the mentor is the one that's always going to bring me back to the center. It's always going to bring me back to, are you living your life within the boundaries that you want to live in? So, on a scale of 1 to 10, let's do this really quick. On a scale of 1 to 10, how willing do you feel like you would be? Let's say that 1 is like not willing at all. 10 is like, I can't wait to do this thing. Where would you fall on that? Between 1 and 10. Go ahead and write that number down. How willing would you be to bring a mentor into your life? And if you already have a mentor, but you don't see each other very much, I encourage you to expand that relationship. Consistency is key when it comes to mentorship. So this is session 5, talking about how do we learn what we don't know. You guys, the way to learn what you don't know, number 1, is by asking questions, getting your hand in the air, allowing a mentor to speak into your life. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope that it is kind of creating some tenderness inside your heart and inside your mind, that even if some of the concepts are difficult to grab hold of, hopefully it's tenderizing you and helping you begin to expand. Hope you get some good conversation out of this with your facilitator. Hey, I'll see you in session 6.
How you think is the most important thing about you.